10 cool abandoned places that time forgot. Are you sick of traveling to places that are totally overrun with tourists? Well, then you'll love these places because they're totally abandoned. Get ready for 10 amazing abandoned destinations that time forgot. Number 1 on this list is the abandoned village on tiny Goji Island off the coast of China's Zhejiang province. Located almost 50 miles off China's east coast, the windows of these abandoned houses face out silently into the Pacific Ocean. We don't know whether the village was abandoned slowly over time or all at once. We actually don't even know why people left it at all. The buildings, which are made in the traditional style of China's east coast, have been completely consumed by ivy. Photographer Qing Jiang said the village reminded her of the Wizard of Oz. So if you've ever wondered what your house would look like if nature took over, well, this is it. While nobody knows what caused Goji Island to be abandoned by humans, everyone knows exactly when and why the number 2 place on our list was abandoned. This is Six Flags New Orleans, and it was abandoned in 2005 after being heavily damaged by Hurricane Katrina. The park had only been open since 2002 and was outfitted complete with roller coasters, bumper cars, fun houses, and all kinds of rides. Everything remains exactly where it was when the park locked up for the night on August 21st, 2005. Just days before Katrina hit. But if this abandoned park looks amusing to you, think twice before you visit. The grounds are locked and under constant patrol by the New Orleans Police Department. Speaking of places that were abandoned in a hurry, number 3 on our list is a small abandoned town in Ukraine, named Pripyat. If that name rings a bell, then you're either a Call of Duty player or a student of past nuclear disasters, because Pripyat was the living space for workers at a nearby power plant by the name of Chernobyl. Originally built in 1970 to be the ideal Soviet community, Pripyat was home to 49,400 people when it was evacuated in 1986 following an explosion and meltdown in Chernobyl's number 4 nuclear reactor. While everything might look fine in this ghost city, check your Geiger counter and you'll find it's still dangerously radioactive. Number 4 on our list is also a giant monument to mankind's thirst for energy. It's a town built on an island on top of a coal mine in the sea, named Hashima Island. Though the island looks tiny, Hashima was home to over 5,000 people at its peak. But if this creepy concrete landscape looks like a nightmare, believe me, for many people it was. To get to the coal, miners traveled down a deep shaft in the island, then into tunnels under the seafloor, where they hacked at the coal by hand. During World War II, 1,300 Korean and Chinese slave laborers died from accidents, malnutrition, and murder by their Japanese guards. It wasn't until the nearby city of Nagasaki was destroyed by an atomic bomb that slavery on Hashima ended. After the war, coal production on Hashima accelerated, and more Japanese miners moved onto the island. But in the 60s, the price of coal dropped, and Hashima was abandoned in 1974. Not because of bombs or radioactivity, but for being too expensive. Whoa, sorry if that was a bit too much history for you. I promise you the number 5 won't have the same problem because we know nearly nothing about the place. Get your nightmare goggles on as we visit this abandoned porcelain doll factory. The factory was photographed by an urban explorer who goes by the name Nacho Labrador. It is thought to be located in Spain, but the photographer has declined to reveal its location. The factory, which appears to be from the early 20th century or earlier, is littered with little arms and faces in their original molds. Oh, and there's one more thing. Some posts about the abandoned factory claim it contains the remains of many dead chickens, all nailed upside down to wooden crosses. Scary enough for you? Okay, we're sticking with the worst nightmare vibe for our number 6 abandoned abode. It's the former home of Al Capone, the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. The penitentiary opened in 1829 and was the most modern prison in the United States at the time. Its architect promoted the so-called Pennsylvania system of corrections, which demanded permanent silence and constant solitary confinement for every inmate. Punishments at Eastern State included dumping cold water on prisoners in the winter, chaining prisoners' tongues to their wrists, strapping the prisoner to a chair for weeks on end, and of course, the hole. After visiting the penitentiary, renowned author Charles Dickens wrote to the governor of Pennsylvania to protest the psychological torture inmates suffered there. Eastern State Penitentiary was finally closed in 1971. Number 7 on our list isn't exactly an abandoned place, more like an abandoned thing. Landlubbers beware, we're paying a visit to Suisun Bay, California, to climb on board some abandoned warships. Located in a nook in the northern part of San Francisco Bay, the ships are maintained by the U.S. Maritime Administration as a National Defense Reserve fleet. After World War II, unneeded naval ships were parked here in case they might be required for a future war. At one time, hundreds of ships were laid up in these waters, but now only 10 remain. You might have guessed that these clunkers aren't exactly battle-ready anymore, and that's exactly why their voyage is ending in 2017. All 10 surviving ships will be scrapped. While we're floating out to sea, let's go all the way to Australia to check out our number 8 abandoned place. If those other ships are a big mess of an environmental disaster, you'll be pleased to hear that this ship is an environment unto itself. The floating forest is actually the remains of an old coal hauler named the SSR Field. Over 100 years ago, the SSR Field was built to haul coal between the cities of Newcastle and Sydney. Then in World War II, it hauled coal to American forces in the Pacific. In 1972, it was parked in its current location when no people wanted it anymore. But it seems nature had other ideas. Mangrove trees started sprouting out of the deck, and now the ship is theirs. Over the life of the floating forest, Homebush Bay has transformed around it. Where its neighbors used to be rusting hulks of World War II-era steel, now the floating forest is surrounded by swanky apartments and an Olympic stadium. Speaking of swanky apartments, our number 9 abandoned place offered accommodation that was out of this world. It's the Sansa UFO houses of northern Taiwan. Construction started on these disc-shaped domiciles in 1978, when Taiwan still had a lot of American soldiers with the time and money for kitschy condos such as these. However, the UFO houses crashed after US troops were pulled out of the country a year later. Then, a series of fatal car accidents and suicides brought all work to a halt. The UFO houses might have been built on an ancient Dutch colonial burial ground. Or maybe it was the destruction of a beloved dragon sculpture by workers at the site. Either way, by 1980, the UFO project was lost in space. Have I still got your attention? Great! Because our number 10 abandoned place has one last history lesson in store for you. It's Ross Island, in the Andaman Islands, which belong to India. Ross Island combines a lot of abandonment themes we've explored earlier. It's an island, it's a prison, it's a forest, and coincidentally, it's also got some Japanese World War II mixed in. Ross Island was claimed by the British in 1788, but weather didn't suit the colonists and they died. Then in 1887, Ross Island became a prison for Indian freedom fighters who opposed the British Raj. If you got sent to Ross Island, you could be pretty sure there was no way you were getting home. But the prison's terrible reputation was turned on the British in 1942 when they lost it to the Japanese. After World War II, it was abandoned again and reclaimed by nature. And that's our list. Catch you next time!